Election Day in the United States, the biggest day of the year in politics, and today I will just be making my predictions for the outcomes of key races in Congress. So, looking at the 538 average polling, we see that Republicans have an 84 and 100 shot to win the House, and Democrats are massively trailing at 16 and 100. Some outcomes putting them as much as around 300 to 232 seats, but most likely outcomes have Republicans winning, and I do think that is going to happen. These numbers are just too statistically big, and there's not many. Because there's so many seats. There's not many key individual races that we can look at and say, okay, if this candidate performs poorly because of one certain reasons, then Democrats will be able to win. There's just so many races, and looking at these numbers, it looks very likely that Republicans are going to win the House of Representatives, and there's not really much more that can be said about it. Looking at the Senate, we can better analyze more individual results. 538 gives Republicans a 59% chance of winning, and Democrats with a 41% chance. So slightly closer, but Republicans still having the lead. Could really go either way. Some key races we're looking at are Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz versus Fetterman. Oz has a 57% chance to win, but I do think John Fetterman will take this one. Josh Shapiro, the governor, has a huge lead over Doug Mastriano, and Fetterman's efforts to use social media to get young people out to vote seems to be pretty effective in Pennsylvania. So I think the fact that a lot of people will be turning out to vote against Doug Mastriano in the governor's race and vote for Josh Shapiro, and the turnout factor will allow John Fetterman to win in Pennsylvania. Looking at across the country to Nevada, were basically tied. Laxalt was a 51% chance, and Cortez Masto was a 49% chance. I do think Laxalt will take this one. It seems like his messaging has been one of the more effective ones that we've seen from Republicans, and Cortez Masto is one of the weaker candidates without many issues that we can pinpoint her positions on. And I think the Nevada voters are like not too satisfied with the how the country is going, especially the more rural areas of the state. So this will be close, but I do think Laxalt will flip the seat. And moving to Arizona, Mark Kelly versus Blake Masters. Kelly with a 66% chance of winning. According to 538, I do agree with that. Power of incumbency is pretty big, and I think Kelly has appealed more to all voters and done a better job of characterizing Blake Masters as a extreme Republican, and the Masters campaign hasn't done as good of a job pinpointing Mark Kelly on some of the national and local issues that affect the state. So I do think Mark Kelly will take this one. And then to Georgia, the last flip seat. Herschel Walker, 63% chance of winning. This one is going to be very, very close. And in Georgia, if neither candidate gets 50% of the vote, then it goes to a runoff. And with this libertarian guy, Chase Oliver, in the race, I do think that this election will not be decided right here. I think Walker will get slightly more of the votes, just looking at these numbers, and especially because Brian Kemp is more popular than Stacey Abrams by a pretty big margin. That'll bring out more Republican voters, but it'll be very close, and I do think that now it's going to be so close that neither candidate will get 50% of the vote, and we will go to a runoff in the state of Georgia. And looking at other races that seem to be more decided, Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, 81% chance, strong incumbent. He's been very effective on hitting Mandela Barnes on the crime issue, and although Wisconsin generally leans blue, I do think that Ron Johnson will end up holding that seat. Ohio is I don't think it's as close as the 87 or as far apart as the 87-13 numbers that they have listed here really is. Tim Ryan is very popular in many parts of the state and is really good at appealing to moderate voters, so I don't think it'll be as much of a blow as this model currently projects it to be. I do think J.D. Vance will end up winning just because the state usually ends up going red when it's considered to be purple, but I do think it will be closer than the margins that they have here. Uh, North Carolina, similar numbers to Ohio, Ted Budd versus Cherry Beasley. Um, Same thing with Ohio. The state is usually considered purple, but in almost all cases, Republicans do end up taking it. And I think that the fact that Ted Budd is already in Congress and has a pretty solid platform based on local issues and the power of Trump, he will end up winning the state by about the margins that they have listed here. And then states that Democrats are expected to hold. New Hampshire was Maggie Hassan versus Don Bolduc. Hassan was 72% chance. I do think she will hold that. She's a pretty moderate centrist, which is usually a good strategy to win in New Hampshire. And Bolduc is a pretty extreme Republican that I don't think many of those people will like up there. And then in Colorado, Michael Bennet, 91% chance of winning. Joe O'Dea does have a shot. He is a very, very moderate Republican, supports Obamacare, but Michael Bennet is a strong incumbent in that state, which is a pretty solid blue stronghold. So I do think that all of those results that we expect to happen will go through, and the only flipped seat that will be Laxalt defeating incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto, Georgia staying undecided, and John Fetterman taking the spot of Pat Toomey. So we will have another case where Georgia, I do think we will have another situation where Georgia will end up deciding who controls the Senate. If Herschel Walker can defeat Raphael Warnock, that means Republicans will flip 2 seats and Democrats will have only flipped 1, so Republicans would have a majority of 51 seats. But if Warnock holds on, then it would be 50-50. And as we know, Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote and would allow Democrats to maintain control of the Senate. So Georgia, again, it will be the way that everyone is going to be looking come whenever the runoff election would happen there. Looking at governors, it's looking pretty shaky for some Democrats, especially in some states that they're supposed to win. If we look at Oregon, who hasn't had a Republican governor in like 40 years, I think, 30 or 40 years, Tina Kotek with 63% chance of winning. I don't really know much about this race, but Oregon is usually a solid blue state, and I don't think that this Republican surge will end up going through. Oregon is just too solidly blue in all other elections, and I think the turnout for the Democratic candidate will allow them to win. Minnesota, very solid blue. They always go blue. Not really worth talking about. Wisconsin is going to be very close. Incumbent Governor Evers is down just slightly in these polls, 47-53. This is a very interesting race. I do think that both incumbents will win. I already said I think Ron Johnson will win in the Senate, and I think that they will reelect Tony Evers to the governorship. Just because in such a purple state, the power of incumbency is very strong, where the governor has a lot of power to decide abortion rights in that state, that will affect the choices of a lot of voters. So I do think that Democrats will hold Wisconsin there, and then Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, 85% chance, even more importance on abortion rights there. Her continued plan to fix infrastructure in the state seems like a pretty popular governor, so I do think that she will win, especially since there's no Senate races that Republicans can also get their voters out for. And Tudor Dixon is a pretty extreme election-denying candidate. Looking at New York, Lee Zeldin is within 4 points in some recent polls, but New York is just too blue for me to predict that Lee Zeldin has a chance here. It'll be closer, probably closer than the 10 points that this poll has it listed as, but I do think that Kathy Hochul will take this by around 6 points. 4 to 6 points, somewhere in that range. Going to Georgia, sadly, Stacey Abrams, who's a very, very exciting candidate with all of her efforts to get out the vote, protect voting rights, and change some of the more Republican policies in Georgia with like guns and taxes, all that stuff. Uh, Brian Kemp is just too much of a moderate Republican. He's not really turning off many voters. All of the more extreme Trump voters are already going to the polls to vote for Herschel Walker, and knowing that they certainly don't want Stacey Abrams, I do think that those people will vote for Kemp, and Abrams will not be able to win this one. Florida, Ron DeSantis should steamroll Charlie Crist, over 99% chance of winning. Florida's just too red, and they like DeSantis too much. Same thing in Texas. Beto, very interesting candidate, very passionate guy, and he's been doing a lot, but he's just going to fall slightly short here, and I do think Greg Abbott will win, as the polls suggest. In Colorado, incumbent Jared Polis should sail to re-election over his Republican opponent, over 99% chance of winning. That shouldn't be much of a contest. Arizona is one of the scariest ones, because Carrie Lake is a crazy election denier. quite frankly, she's had some crazy ideas on COVID treatments and election stuff and voting machines, and I would not trust her to be the governor of my state. It is quite concerning that 538 is her list is over 2/3 chance of winning this one, but it's tough. The Mark Kelly in being up for re-election against Blake Masters is going to help out Katie Hobbs here. Hobbs hasn't ran that aggressive of a campaign. More national forces have tried to jump on Carrie Lake as an extreme Republican, but I don't think Hobbs has done slightly enough as she could be doing. But I do think that Arizona, which have been leaning blue in recent years, moderate Republican Governor Doug Ducey is leaving office. I do think that Katie Hobbs will escape in a very close and terrifying race to watch. And the other scary candidate, Doug Mastriano, is getting just crushed by Josh Shapiro, Attorney General of the state. Another election-denying Republican was at the Capitol on January 6th. Josh Shapiro, 97% chance of winning. He should sail to victory. And that's, as I was saying before, that's also a reason why I think Fetterman will defeat Dr. Oz. There's just too much Democratic support of Josh Shapiro for the people who don't want Doug Mastriano to win. They will be motivated to go to the polls and also cast their ballot for Fetterman. And then looking at Nevada, incumbent Steve Sisolak down just slightly, 40% chance of winning versus Joe Lombardo, who is an election denier in some capacity. This one is really tough because I do think that Adam Laxalt will unseat Cortez Masto because of bad trends nationally, but I do think that Sisolak's incumbency has a different effect on the state than Senator Cortez Masto does, just because he can go towards his accomplishments for the state legislation that he's been able to push through his executive orders and stuff, and in the purple state, that's pretty powerful, and I do think that things have been going pretty well in Nevada. I don't remember exactly the results of the last approval polls, but I do think that Nevada is one of the better U.S. states to live in right now. So another very close one, like in Arizona, but I do think this one will lean slightly to Sisolak, and will win by probably under 1 point. Very close race here. They also probably don't like that Joe Lombardo is an election denier, and that the Sisolak campaign has been doing an okay job of painting him as an extremist. And so, yeah, those are my predictions for all the races. We will see in either in some cases in like 6 hours whether these are true, and in other cases they might be up to 3 or 4 days after they count the mail-in ballots. We will see a red mirage as we did in 2020, as the in-person ballots get counted first, and the Democratic-leaning vote by mail will be counted second. So, going to be quite an interesting night, and I'm very excited to see what happens, but also quite terrified in some situations. So, yeah.